In the shadowed cradle of forgotten thrones, where iron chains whisper secrets to the dawn, a mortal heart learns that captivity can forge crowns from the bones of empires. The wind howled through the jagged spires of Castle Vorath like a lament from the grave, carrying the metallic tang of blood and the faint acrid bite of gunpowder. Ilara Voss had known war's embrace too intimately, its cold fingers tracing the scars along her ribs, the fever that now burned beneath her skin like a dying star. At 28, she was a ghost of the woman who had once tended the olive groves of her coastal village in Eldoria, before the border skirmishes turned her world to ash. Abandoned by her kin in the chaos of retreat, betrayed by allies who fled with the first cannon's roar, she had fought not for glory, but survival. Now, chained in the depths of this forsaken fortress, her wrists raw from the iron manacles, she wondered if the gods had finally tired of her defiance. The cell was a tomb of stone and shadow, its walls slick with condensation that dripped like reluctant tears. A single candle flickered on a ledge, its flame dancing in the draft, casting elongated shadows that clawed at the floor. Ilara leaned against the damp wall, her breath shallow, each inhale a rasp against the infection ravaging her lungs. She had been captured 3 days prior, during the siege of Blackthorn Pass, a prisoner of war in a conflict that pitted Eldoria's fragile republic against the enigmatic kingdom of Nocturne. Whispers among the guards spoke of their ruler as a specter, a being who had walked the earth for centuries, his armies undefeated not by steel alone, but by something darker, eternal. Ilara dismissed such tales as the fever's delirium, yet the weight of those chains felt like fate's cruel jest. Footsteps echoed in the corridor beyond, deliberate and unhurried, like the tolling of a distant bell. The door groaned open on rusted hinges, admitting a figure cloaked in midnight velvet. He was tall, his presence filling the space as if the shadows themselves bent to his will. King Thorn Draven, sovereign of Nocturne, though his title was but a veil over the truth. An immortal, a vampire whose bloodline traced back to the shadowed annals of antiquity. 400 years had etched lines of quiet sorrow into his ageless face, his eyes the color of storm-tossed seas, holding the guilt of empires lost and lives unmade. Once a warrior poet in a forgotten age, he had chosen eternity not for power, but to atone for a betrayal that shattered his mortal soul, the slaying of his own kin in a bid for peace that birthed endless war. Solitary now, he ruled with an ethic forged in isolation, sparing the innocent even as his realm hungered for conquest. "You are Ilara Voss," he said, his voice a low timbre that resonated like velvet over gravel, carrying no malice, only a profound weariness. He did not enter fully, respecting the barrier of her captivity, though the candle's light gilded the sharp planes of his jaw, the faint scar tracing his collarbone, a remnant of a wound that should have killed him centuries ago. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze despite the tremor in her limbs. Defiance was her last armor. "And you are the monster who chains women in his dungeons. What do you want? My village is gone. There's nothing left to take." Thorn's lips curved in a shadow of a smile, not cruel, but tinged with an ancient melancholy. He stepped closer, the air shifting with the subtle scent of aged leather and night-blooming jasmine, a fragrance that evoked forgotten gardens under moonlight. "Monsters do not ask for names before they strike. I seek understanding, not surrender. Your people invaded our borders, Ilara, but war is a chain that binds us all. Tell me, what drives a healer to wield a blade?" The question pierced her, unraveling the threads of her resolve. Healer, yes, that was who she had been before the fever and the flight. Her hands, calloused from binding wounds and brewing salves, now clenched into fists against the iron. "Survival," she whispered, the word tasting of bile. "When your king's shadows swallow homes whole, what choice remains? We fought for light in the dark." He knelt then, eye level with her, his movements fluid, almost reverent. The candle's glow caught the silver ring on his finger, etched with thorns entwining a rose, a symbol of his cursed lineage, a reminder that beauty and pain were eternal twins. Light and dark are not enemies, but lovers in disguise. I have seen empires rise and crumble, Ilara, watched mortals choose death over the void of forever. Yet you burn with a fire that defies extinguishing. She recoiled as he extended a hand, not to touch, but to offer a vial of dark liquid, its surface shimmering like captured starlight. Drink this. It will ease the poison in your blood. His eyes held hers, a storm of unspoken confessions. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, and in that moment, Thorn glimpsed in her the echo of his own fracture, the desolation of loss, the quiet yearning for redemption. Ilara hesitated, rationalizing the pull she felt, the inexplicable warmth blooming in her chest against the chill of fear. It was madness, this intrigue toward her captor, a man whose very breath seemed to carry the weight of centuries. Love, if it dared whisper here, would be resisted, dissected by her weary mind. Yet the fever clawed deeper, and with a trembling hand, she accepted the vial. The liquid was cool, tasting of iron and wild honey, spreading through her veins like liquid moonlight. Strength returned in waves, but so did visions, fleeting images of Thorn's past. Battlefields awash in crimson, a lover's plea in the rain, the first taste of immortality's bitter gift. As the door closed behind him, leaving her alone with the dying candle, Ilara touched the chain at her wrist. It felt heavier now, not with iron, but possibility. Outside, the wind mourned on, but in the silence of her cell, a question stirred. What if chains were not endings, but the forge of unforeseen crowns? And as dawn's first light pierced the narrow window, painting her skin in gold, she felt the invisible presence of death linger, waiting for her choice. The vial's essence lingered in Ilara's veins like a secret whispered by the stars, chasing the fever's grip into retreat, but awakening shadows she had long buried. She sat in the dimming cell, the candle's wick now a blackened stub, its final flickers painting the iron chains in erratic gold. The dawn light, pale and insistent, filtered through the barred window, illuminating motes of dust that danced like lost souls. Her body ached with renewed vigor, yet her mind reeled from the visions, Thorn's ancient battles, the rain-slicked face of a woman pleading for mercy he could not grant, the metallic tang of blood on his tongue as eternity claimed him. These were not her memories, yet they burrowed into her heart, stirring a forbidden empathy for the man who held her captive. Footsteps approached again, lighter this time, accompanied by the rustle of fabric and the faint clink of keys. The door swung open, revealing not Thorn, but a woman whose presence was a blade wrapped in silk. Lyrian, Thorn's advisor and confidant, a Dhampir of ethereal grace, her skin luminous as porcelain under the half-light, eyes the hue of shadowed amber. At 120 years, she straddled the veil between worlds, born of a vampire's union with a mortal seer, her blood a fragile bridge granting her longevity without the full curse of thirst. Traumas of her own etched her poise. Orphaned in nocturne civil wars, she had clawed her way to Thorn's side, driven by a desire to mend the fractures of a kingdom teetering on eternal night. Yet solitude clung to her like mist. Her loyalty to the king, a quiet love unspoken, resisted in the name of duty. "You look less like a corpse," Lyrian observed, her voice a melody laced with thorns, as she entered with a tray bearing bread, cheese, and a flask of water. She set it down with deliberate care, her gaze appraising Ilara not with hostility, but a clinician's detachment. The king's elixir works swiftly, though it reveals more than it heals. Ilara pushed herself upright, the chains rattling like accusatory whispers. Strength coursed through her, but so did suspicion, the vial's honeyed iron now a knot in her stomach. Reveals? You mean invades? What sorcery did he force upon me? I saw things. His things. Lyrian's lips quirked, a flicker of amusement shadowed by sorrow. She knelt to unlock one manacle, her fingers cool and precise, the metal yielding with a sigh. Not sorcery, but truth. Thorn shares fragments of himself with those he deems worthy. You are no mere prisoner, Ilara Voss. The council debates your fate, execution for the spies you harbored, or leverage in the fragile truce with Eldoria. But he sees potential in your fire, a healer turned warrior. War devours us all. Perhaps you could temper its blade. Freed from one chain, Ilara rubbed her wrist, the skin marked with red welts that throbbed like fresh wounds. The air in the cell thickened with the scent of damp stone and the faint, herbal sharpness of Lyrian's presence, nightshade and rosemary evoking hidden apothecaries. She wanted to lash out, to demand her release, but the visions tempered her rage, painting Thorn not as a tyrant, but a sentinel haunted by choices long decayed. Potential? For what? To become another ghost in your endless night? I've lost everything to this war, my home, my hands stained with blood I never sought. Why should I trust a kingdom built on shadows? Lyrian paused, her amber eyes softening as she refastened the remaining chain to a longer lead, allowing Ilara limited movement. Outside, the wind carried the distant clamor of the fortress awakening, guards' boots on cobblestone, the low bellow of horns signaling the morning muster. Nocturne's armies gathered for the border patrols, a political chess game where Eldoria's Republicans probed for weaknesses, whispering of alliances with distant empires. Betrayal simmered in every council chamber, old feuds reigniting like embers in dry tinder. Trust is a luxury we immortals forfeited centuries ago, Lyrian replied, her voice dropping to a confessional hush. Thorn rules not from throne's greed, but guilt. He was once like you, mortal, fractured by loss, a poet who slew his brother to end a war, only to birth eternity's curse. Every decision weighs on him, a crown of thorns. And you. Your defiance mirrors his own youth. He resists this pull toward you, as you must resist it in kind. Love in our world is a double-edged blade, cutting redeemer and redeemed alike. Ilara's breath caught, the word love hanging like smoke, irrational and unwelcome. She rationalized it as the elixir's haze, a survival instinct twisting toward the hand that fed her strength. Yet her pulse quickened at the memory of Thorn's storm-gray eyes, the silver ring glinting like a promise of entangled fates, the thorns and rose, beauty forged in pain. Death hovered in the cell's corners, its invisible form a chill draft, reminding her that mortality was both gift and thief. I fight for my people, not your king's redemption, she said, voice steady despite the turmoil. Release me, and perhaps there's a path to peace. Chain me further, and I'll drag your shadows into the light. Lyrian rose, her silhouette framed by the window's glow, where the sun climbed higher, gilding the spires in reluctant gold. Peace is a ritual of choices, Ilara. Tonight, the council convenes. Thorn will advocate for you, but politics demand sacrifice. Choose your words wisely, they may crown or condemn. She turned to leave, but paused, glancing back with a Dhampir's piercing insight. And beware the visions, they bind as surely as iron. As the door sealed shut, Ilara paced the extended length of her tether. The stone floor cold beneath her bare feet, each step echoing her inner storm. The bread lay untouched, its crust rough as the scars on her soul. Introspection clawed at her. Was this vitality a mercy or a malediction, drawing her into a web of eternity she despised? The ring's image resurfaced in her mind, thorns piercing petals, a symbol of love's inevitable wound. War's distant drums thrummed through the walls, a reminder that kingdoms rose on the bones of the forsaken, and she, a healer adrift, teetered on the edge of transformation. Hours blurred into the afternoon's pallid light, the cell's shadows lengthening like fingers reaching for her resolve. When the door opened once more, it was Thorn who entered. His velvet cloak dusted with the frost of an early snow that whispered against the panes. His face, etched with the day's burdens, held a quiet intensity, the scar at his collarbone catching the light like a vein of silver. "The council stirs unrest," he murmured, closing the distance with measured grace. "Eldoria's envoys demand your head as tribute, but I see in you not a pawn, but a mirror to my own chains." Ilara met his gaze, heart pounding against the cage of her ribs, the air between them charged with unspoken gravity. The rose thorn ring gleamed on his finger, drawing her eye, and in that instant a revelation dawned, not of escape, but entanglement. He extended his hand, not for the vial this time, but an invitation to stand beside him at the council's threshold. A choice veiled in peril: step into the light of alliance, or remain in the shadow of defiance. As snowflakes melted on the window, tracing rivulets like tears, she felt death's breath quicken, urging her toward the precipice where mortality and forever collided. What crown awaited in the heart of the storm? The snow fell in relentless veils outside the cell's narrow window, muting the world beyond into a hush of white and shadow, as if the heavens themselves wept for the choices yet to be made. Ilara stood frozen in the moment, her hand hovering inches from Thorn's extended palm, the air between them thick with the scent of frost-kissed stone and the subtle undercurrent of his ancient blood. Earthy, like turned soil after a storm. Her heart thundered, a mortal drumbeat against the eternal silence he embodied, rationalizing the tremor in her fingers as lingering effects of the elixir rather than this inexplicable draw. She was a prisoner, a casualty of war's indifferent maw, not some fated consort to a king of night. Yet the rose-thorn ring on his finger caught the fading light, its silver thorns glinting like accusations, petals etched in eternal bloom, a symbol that bound pain and beauty in unbreakable alloy. "I am no ally to your shadows," she said, her voice a thread of defiance woven through uncertainty, stepping back until the chain at her ankle tugged taut, a cold reminder of her bounds. The metal bit into her skin, raw and insistent, mirroring the pull in her chest, a war between survival's pragmatism and the visions that now haunted her waking hours, fragments of Thorn's guilt-laced eternity bleeding into her own fractured soul. Thorn's hand withdrew slowly, not in offense, but with a measured grace that spoke of centuries spent mastering restraint. His storm-gray eyes, deep as abyssal seas, held no command, only a quiet plea shadowed by the weight of his crown. "Nor do I ask you to be," he replied, his timbre low and resonant, vibrating through the chill air like the distant rumble of thunder over frozen peaks. The council gathers in the great hall at dusk. Eldoria's envoys arrive under truce banners, demanding reparations in blood, yours among them, to appease their fractured republic. I would have you witness the fray, not as captive, but as voice. Speak your truths there, Ilara, and perhaps forge a path where chains yield to covenants. She searched his face, tracing the faint lines of sorrow that no immortality could erase, the scar at his collarbone a pale river under the velvet of his cloak. He was no monster of tavern tales, but a sentinel scarred by betrayal's blade, his brother's blood on his hands, a poet's quill turned to sword in a bid for peace that birthed endless night. The elixir had shown her that much. The rain-slicked battlefield where he had chosen not to die, eternity's gift, a curse that isolated him amid the clamor of his kingdom's wars. Political tempests brewed in Nocturne's halls, old alliances fracturing like ice under pressure, whispers of treason from within his own court. Lyrian's warnings echoed in her mind, love as a double-edged blade, resisted yet inevitable. Ilara shoved the thought aside, attributing the warmth uncoiling in her veins to the hearth's distant glow filtering through the door. The chain's length allowed her to approach the window, where snowflakes adhered to the iron bars like fragile wards against the encroaching dark. Outside, the castle's spires pierced the storm, their stone facades etched with the patina of ages, while below, torches flared in the courtyard, illuminating ranks of soldiers in black leather and silver mail, their breaths clouding the air as they prepared for the envoy's arrival. War's texture clung to everything: the metallic tang of oiled blades, the muffled thud of boots on packed snow, the low murmur of voices laced with suspicion. Nocturne teetered on the brink of broader conflict, Eldoria's spies sowing discord, ancient pacts unraveling like frayed tapestries. Thorn watched her, unmoving, the candle on the ledge reigniting with a servant's unseen hand, its flame casting golden halos around his form. "You fear the bind," he said softly, not a question but an acknowledgement, stepping closer until the space between them hummed with unspoken tension. "As I once did. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, Ilara, frail, desperate, clinging to a fragment of light amid the abyss. I offer no eternity, only a moment's alliance. Stand with me, and let your healer's wisdom temper the council's thirst for vengeance." Her fingers brushed the window's ledge, the wood splintered and cold, evoking the olive groves of her youth, now ash under cannon fire, her hands once gentle with salves, now calloused from wielding a rifle in desperate flight. Abandoned, fever-ravaged, she had been a disillusioned wraith, trusting no one after her village's fall. Yet here, in this king's gaze, she glimpsed a mirror, his solitude echoing her own, guilt a shared shroud. Rationalization crumbled under the weight of inevitability. This was no love, she told herself, merely strategy in a Game of Thrones. But as she turned to him, the rose-thorn ring drew her eye once more, its emblem pulsing like a heartbeat in the firelight. "Free me fully," she demanded, voice steady despite the storm within, "and I'll speak. But know this, my words will carve toward peace, not your dominion. Eldoria bleeds as much as your borders. End this war, or drag us all into the grave." A flicker of something profound, relief perhaps, or the dawn of redemption, crossed his features. He knelt, key in hand, the lock yielding with a soft click that echoed like a vow. The chain fell away, pooling at her feet like shed skin, leaving her ankle bare and aching. Freedom's texture was bittersweet, the air rushing in cooler, freer, yet laced with peril. Thorn rose, offering his arm not as captor, but equal, the scent of jasmine and leather enveloping her as she hesitated, then placed her hand on his sleeve. Velvet met calloused palm, a tactile bridge between worlds. They ascended the winding stair from the dungeons, torches sputtering in iron sconces, their flames painting the walls in crimson and gold, shadows twisting like specters of doubt. The castle's heart thrummed with anticipation, the distant chime of bells summoning the council, the rustle of silken robes and clinking of jeweled goblets in hidden alcoves. Lyrian awaited at the hall's threshold, her amber eyes narrowing at the sight of Ilara unchained, a Dhampir's intuition flaring with unspoken jealousy, her own desires for Thorn buried under layers of loyalty. "The envoys are within," she murmured, voice a silken warning, "and the air reeks of treachery. Choose your ground wisely, mortal." The great doors groaned open, admitting them to a chamber of vaulted arches and flickering candelabras, where nobles in velvet and fur gathered around a long oak table scarred by centuries of oaths. Eldoria's envoys, stern-faced men in Republican gray, stood rigid, their eyes locking on Ilara with predatory gleam. Thorn guided her to his side, the rose-thorn ring brushing her wrist in accidental intimacy, igniting a spark that raced through her blood. As voices rose in heated debate, demands for her execution, counters of Nocturne's unyielding sovereignty, a revelation crystallized in the chaos. She was no longer mere prisoner, but pivot in this political maelstrom, her choice a ritual that could shatter empires or bind them in fragile peace. Ilara stepped forward, the room falling silent under her gaze, the weight of eternity and mortality colliding in her chest. "Hear me," she began, words flowing like a healer's balm over wounds, "for war has chained us all, mortal and immortal alike. But in this hall, we can unmake those bonds." Her voice trailed as an envoy's hand slipped toward a concealed dagger, the glint of steel catching the light, betrayal uncoiling like a serpent in the snow-dusted night. Thorn's body tensed beside her, his hand hovering protectively as the fragile truce teetered on the knife's edge. What blade would fall first, and whose blood would crown the dawn? And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The great hall of Castle Vorath pulsed with the tension of a storm about to break, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadows where torchlight dared not climb, the air heavy with the scent of beeswax candles and the sharp, metallic edge of impending violence. Ilara's words hung unfinished, a fragile bridge over the chasm of distrust, as the Eldorian envoy's fingers closed around the hilt of his concealed dagger. The blade whispered free, its steel catching the flicker of a nearby candelabrum, casting a crimson gleam that danced like blood on the polished oak table. Nobles gasped, silken robes rustling like dry leaves in a gale, while Lyrian's hand darted to the slender sword at her hip, her amber eyes narrowing to slits of shadowed fire. Thorn moved with the lethal grace of centuries, his body interposing between Ilara and the threat, one arm extending to shield her as if she were already woven into the fabric of his eternal solitude. The rose-thorn ring on his finger glinted, thorns seeming to sharpen in the light, a talisman of wounds that bound rather than severed. "Stand down," he commanded, his voice a low thunder that reverberated through the hall. Not roaring, but inexorable, carrying the weight of empires he had both forged and mourned. The envoy froze, dagger half-drawn, his face a mask of republican fervor twisted by fear, eyes wide, breath ragged, the pulse at his throat visible like a mortal countdown. Ilara's heart slammed against her ribs, the unchained freedom at her ankle now a hollow gift amid this maelstrom. She had stepped forward to plead for peace, her healer's instincts urging her to mend the fractures of war, but the visions from Thorn's elixir surged unbidden, his brother's final plea in the rain, the first crimson tide of immortality washing away his humanity. Rationalization clawed at her. This was no destiny, merely the desperate calculus of survival in a hall where betrayal bloomed like nightshade. Yet as Thorn's cloak brushed her arm, the faint warmth of his presence pierced the chill, stirring a resistance she could not name, a pull toward the light hidden in his shadowed gaze. The envoy sneered, his voice slicing through the hush like shattered glass. "Peace? From the vampire king's lips. This woman is a traitor to Eldoria, harbinger of spies who poisoned our wells. Her blood for ours, or we withdraw and let the borders burn." Murmurs rippled among the nocturne nobles, velvet-clad figures shifting in their high-backed chairs, faces pale as moonlit marble, their own guilts whispering of civil wars past, betrayals that had elevated Thorn to his thorn-crowned throne. Lyrian stepped forward, her Dhampir poise a blade of silk, positioning herself at Ilara's flank. "Treachery in truce is the coward's crown," she hissed, her breath cool as autumn mist, carrying the subtle herbal bite of rosemary that masked deeper longings. Her loyalty to Thorn was a quiet ache, a love rationalized as duty, now flaring with protective fervor as she eyed the mortal woman who had breached his isolation. Thorn's hand remained steady, not drawing his own blade, but gesturing to the guards at the hall's edges, their silver mail clinking softly like distant chains. Enough. Ilara Voss speaks for no crown but her own conscience. She has seen the fever of war from both sides, Eldoria's olive groves razed, Nocturne's shadows encroaching. Hear her, or let this blade seal our fates in blood. His eyes met Alara's over his shoulder, a storm-gray plea laced with the guilt of his ancient fracture. The poet who had slain kin for peace, only to inherit eternity's endless vigil. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, and in her defiance he saw his own lost mortality reflected, a mirror that tempted redemption even as it terrified. The envoy hesitated, dagger trembling, the hall's atmosphere thickening with the texture of suspended breath, the slow drip of melting wax from overhead chandeliers, the faint creak of wooden beams settling under snow's weight, the distant howl of wind battering the stained glass windows, depicting fallen kings. Alara felt death's invisible caress then, a chill draft curling around her ankles like fingers from the grave, reminding her of the infection that had nearly claimed her, the abandonments that had hollowed her soul. Her village's fall replayed in flashes, cannon smoke choking the air, allies fleeing into the night, leaving her to bind wounds alone amid the cries. Disillusioned, broken, she had rationalized every kill as necessity, but here, unchained yet entangled, the inevitability pressed. Alliance with this immortal could forge peace or doom her to his world's shadows. Stepping beside Thorn, she raised her voice, steady as a healer's incantation. I am no spy, no harbinger. I am Alara Voss, daughter of Eldoria's coast, healer turned reluctant warrior by your war's hunger. Chains bound me below, but words can unbind us all. End this cycle, reparations in land, not blood. Let envoys parley under open skies, not daggers in the dark. Her words wove through the tension, a thread of light in the gothic gloom, the candelabra's flames leaping as if in response, gilding her scarred hands and the faint bruises at her wrists. The envoy's arm slackened, the dagger slipping back into concealment, his face crumpling under the weight of her truth. Murmurs swelled to cautious approval, Lyrian's tension easing into a nod of reluctant respect, her amber gaze lingering on Alara with a mix of wariness and intrigue. The Dhampir sensing the budding entanglement, a romance that threatened her own unspoken claim. Thorn exhaled, a sound almost human in its relief, his fingers brushing hers in fleeting contact, the rose-thorn ring cool against her skin, igniting a spark that raced like elixir through her veins. Introspection flooded her. This was resistance incarnate, love's whisper disguised as strategy, yet the texture of his touch, velvet over unyielding strength, doomed her rationalizations to ash. As the council reconvened in tentative accord, maps unrolled across the table like veins of fate, voices debating borders and pacts under the watchful eyes of portraits long dead. A servant slipped Thorn a sealed missive, its wax stamped with a thorn rose emblem twisted in malice. He broke it open, his face darkening as he read, the hall's fragile peace fracturing anew. Treason from within, he murmured to Alara and Lyrian, voice of velvet grave. One of our own sells secrets to Eldoria's radicals, a plot to assassinate me at Dawn's council, framing your people as the blade. The revelation hit like a ritual's turning. Choice loomed not just political, but personal. Expose the traitor and risk civil war's blaze, or shield the kingdom and bind Alara deeper into eternity's web. Her hand tightened on his sleeve, the snow outside thickening to a blizzard that buried the world in white oblivion as death's shadow lengthened, whispering of crowns forged in betrayal's fire. What sacrifice would redeem them, and at what cost to the fragile light between mortal heart and immortal soul? The blizzard raged beyond the great hall's arched windows, its fury a white shroud that smothered the torchlit spires of Castle Voreth, turning the world into a canvas of isolation where secrets festered like wounds beneath frost. Inside, the air hung thick with the residue of averted violence, beeswax smoke curling from guttered candles, the faint, acrid tang of fear sweat on the envoy's brows, and the subtle, underlying pulse of Nocturne's ancient stone, vibrating with the weight of betrayals yet to unfold. Alara stood close to Thorn, her fingers still curled into the velvet of his sleeve, the rose thorn ring's cool edge pressing against her skin like a brand of unintended alliance. The missive's words burned in her mind, inked in haste. A traitor's vow to strike at dawn, pinning the blade on Eldoria's shadows to ignite full war. Her healer's instincts screamed for suture, for binding the fractures before they hemorrhaged into catastrophe, yet the intimacy of this moment, his nearness a gravitational pull she rationalized as mere exigency, stirred deeper tempests. Thorn folded the parchment with deliberate calm, his storm-gray eyes scanning the assembled faces. Nobles in fur-trimmed cloaks, their expressions a mosaic of feigned loyalty and veiled ambition. Lyrian, poised like a sentinel at the table's edge, her amber gaze flicking between Alara and the king with a Dhampir's sharpened intuition, sensing the threads of entanglement weaving tighter. The Eldorian envoys shifted uneasily, their Republican grays stark against the hall's opulent gloom, oblivious to the serpent coiled within Nocturne's own ranks. "We adjourn until dawn," Thorn declared, his voice a resonant timbre that cut through the murmurs like a blade through silk, carrying no tremor despite the guilt that etched his soul, the echo of his brother's blood, a fratricide that had crowned him in thorns rather than gold. Borders will be redrawn in ink, not crimson, but vigilance tempers our peace. As the hall emptied in a rustle of robes and clinking spurs, Thorn guided Alara toward a shadowed alcove, Lyrian trailing like a ghost bound by duty. The candelabra's flames sputtered, casting elongated shadows that clawed at the tapestries depicting long-fallen battles, their threads frayed like the kingdom's fraying packs. Snow lashed the stained glass, muffling the outer world's clamor, the distant whinny of war horses stabled against the storm, the low groan of wind through arrow slits. Alara's bare feet, chilled on the flagstones, ached with the phantom bite of chains, a reminder that freedom was illusory in this Gothic labyrinth. She withdrew her hand from his sleeve, the separation a deliberate resistance, attributing the warmth lingering on her palm to the hall's dying hearths rather than the inexorable draw toward this immortal whose solitude mirrored her own desolation. "The traitor is Lord Vesper," Thorn confided in a hush, his breath stirring the air with jasmine and aged leather, evoking forgotten cloisters under moonlight. "My spy master, once a brother-in-arms from the civil wars that birthed my reign. He whispers to Eldoria's radicals, promising my head for their gold, framing you as the conduit to absolve their envoy's hands." His fingers traced the rose-thorn ring absently, the silver thorns glinting as if alive, petals forever caught in defiant bloom. 4 centuries of ethical isolation had honed him into this, a king who spared the undeserving, atoned through restraint, yet now faced a blade from within, his guilt a shadow that deepened with every choice deferred. Lyrian's voice interjected, cool as the snow seeping through cracks, her presence a herbal counterpoint, rosemary sharp against the hall's musk. "Vesper's ambition festers from the old betrayals, when you chose mercy over purge after the uprising. He sees your softness as weakness, especially now, with her." Her gaze lingered on Alara, laced with unspoken thorns of her own. A Dhampir's quiet yearning for Thorn, rationalized as counsel, now threatened by this mortal's fire. At 120, Lyrian bore the scars of Nocturne's fractures, orphaned in the purges, her seer mother's visions unheeded, driving her to forge a bridge between worlds through unrequited loyalty. Yet envy coiled beneath her poise, a shadow she resisted, knowing love in eternity was a curse that devoured the giver. Alara's pulse quickened, the visions from the elixir resurfacing unbidden. Thorn's mortal youth, quill in hand amid olive groves not unlike her own, shattered by war's maw, the rain-drenched plea of kin he could not save. Eternity's first bite, a redemption laced with isolation. She rationalized the empathy blooming in her chest as strategic clarity, a healer's diagnosis of shared suffering, not the inevitable entanglement that whispered of transcendence. Death lingered in the alcove's chill, its formless breath tracing her spine, evoking the fever's near embrace, the abandonments that had left her disillusioned, hands stained with the blood of necessity. "Then expose him," she urged, voice steady despite the turmoil, stepping closer to the alcove's narrow window where frost etched fractal patterns like veins of fate. "Before dawn claims another soul. I've mended enough wounds in this war. Let me help unmake its roots." Thorn's eyes met hers, profound and weary, the scar at his collarbone rising with a slow inhale, a mark from the night he chose not to die, poet turned eternal guardian. "Exposure ignites civil war, Alara. Vesper commands the border legions. His fall fractures Nocturne, invites Eldoria's full assault. I have walked this precipice before, slaying kin for peace, only to inherit endless night." His hand hovered near hers, not touching. The rose-thorn ring, a barrier and beacon, symbol of beauty's inevitable pierce. Introspection gripped him. In her, he glimpsed the light he had forsaken, a mortal redemption that tempted the curse of attachment, resisted yet inexorable. Lyrian interceded, her fingers brushing Thorn's arm in a gesture masked as advisory, the touch lingering a fraction too long. "Confront him in private at the Dawn Council's antechamber. I will shadow the envoys, ensure their blades stay sheathed. But you, mortal," she turned to Alara, amber eyes piercing, "must choose your role. Witness as ally, or recuse as prisoner reborn. Love's ritual demands sacrifice, tread it unwary, and it crowns you in thorns." The words struck like a ritual's invocation, Alara's breath catching at the unspoken truth. This was no mere politics, but a crossroads where mortality brushed eternity's hem. She nodded, rationalizing alliance as duty to her ravaged homeland. Yet the texture of the moment, the velvet hush of the hall, the snow's muffled roar, the ring's glint promising entangled fates, doomed her denials. They parted for the night, Thorn escorting her to chambers above the dungeons, a room of velvet drapes and a roaring fire that chased the cold, its flames dancing shadows across a gilded mirror, reflecting her transformed gaze. No longer broken wraith, but pivot in empire's weave. As midnight deepened, Alara paced the fur-strewn floor, the fire's crackle a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. Death's chill seeping through the stones like an uninvited guest. Visions plagued her. Vesper's shadowed figure in the missive script, Thorn's hand raised in mercy, turned to judgment. Choice loomed as revelation, a ritual at dawn where she could sway the confrontation, forge peace from betrayal's forge, or watch it all crumble into war's abyss. Rationalization frayed. The pull toward Thorn was inevitable, a love veiled in resistance, redemptive yet damning. Dawn crept in gray veils, the blizzard yielding to a brittle calm as Thorn's summons arrived, a velvet cloak for her shoulders, Lyrian's nod of wary accord. They converged in the antechamber, Vesper awaiting with feigned obeisance, his eyes gleaming with radical fire. But as Thorn unveiled the missive, demanding fealty or fall, a hidden panel groaned open behind the traitor, revealing not one blade, but many. Vesper's conspirators, cloaked in Eldorian gray, surging forward in a tide of steel and deception. Thorn whirled, shielding Alara, Lyrian's sword flashing, the rose-thorn ring catching the first light as blood sprayed the stones. In the chaos, Alara's hand found his, a choice sealed in grip. Fight for this fragile light, or let shadows claim the crown she never sought. What eternity would dawn from betrayal's blade, and whose heart would bear its thorned weight? The antechamber erupted in a frenzy of steel and shadow, the brittle dawn light slicing through frost-laced windows like hesitant blades, illuminating the conspirators' faces, twisted masks of ambition and radical zeal, their cloaks a patchwork of Nocturne's black and Eldoria's gray. Vesper lunged first, his dagger arcing toward Thorn's exposed side, but the king twisted with immortal precision, his free hand clamping the traitor's wrist in a vice of unyielding strength. Bone cracked under the pressure, a sharp snap echoing off the vaulted stone like a vow broken. Ilara's grip tightened on Thorn's other hand, her calloused fingers intertwining with his, the rose-thorn ring pressing into her palm, a searing emblem of beauty's pierce, now a talisman against the chaos. Her heart thundered, a mortal rhythm clashing with the eternal calm he exuded, rationalizing this desperate clasp as survival's reflex, not the inevitable surrender to the light flickering in his storm-gray eyes. Lyrian moved like liquid night, her sword a silver blur that cleaved through the first assailant's guard, blood blooming on the flagstones in dark petals that mirrored the ring's eternal rose. Her amber eyes blazed with a Dhampir's fury, rosemary sharp scent cutting through the metallic tang of spilled life, her strikes fueled by loyalties fractured yet unbroken. She had resisted her own shadows for Thorn, centuries of orphaned isolation, visions from her seer blood unheeded in Nocturne's purges. Yet here, defending the mortal who had breached his solitude, envy twisted into fierce resolve. "To the king!" she cried, voice a silken lash, rallying the loyal guards who burst through the side doors, their boots thudding like war drums on the chilled stone. Ilara ducked as a conspirator's blade whistled past, the air parting with a hiss that grazed her cheek, drawing a thin line of warmth that trickled like a reluctant tear. The room's textures assaulted her, the velvet hush of cloaks whipping in motion, the gritty slide of boots on blood-slick marble, the faint crackle of torches sputtering in iron sconces, their flames leaping gold against the encroaching gray light. Death danced in the periphery, its invisible form a chill gust from the open panel, evoking the fever's fevered grasp, the cannon smoke of her village's fall, the abandonments that had left her disillusioned and alone. She was no warrior born, but a healer forged in necessity, and in this maelstrom, choice crystallized, a ritual of blood and bond where she could flee to the shadows or stand as the pivot empires craved. Thorn released Vesper with a shove that sent the traitor crumpling against the wall, his face contorted in betrayal's final gasp, eyes widening as Lyrian's blade found his throat. Crimson sprayed, warm and viscous, spattering Ilara's cloak like accusations from the grave. The king whirled to her, his scar at the collarbone stark under the torn velvet, breath steady despite the fray. "Stay with me," he urged, voice a low timbre laced with ancient weariness, pulling her behind a fallen tapestry as blades clashed in a symphony of desperation. Conspirators fell one by one, their cries muffled by the blizzard's lingering howl outside, but not without cost. A guard slumped, gurgling, his loyalty etched in the pool widening beneath him. In the alcove's brief sanctuary, Thorn's gaze locked on hers, profound and unguarded, the rose-thorn ring glinting as he cupped her face, thumb tracing the cut on her cheek. The touch was electric, cool marble against fevered skin, stirring visions anew, his mortal youth amid olive groves, quill-stained with ink and regret, the rain-slicked fratricide that birthed his eternity, a choice not to die that isolated him in guilt's velvet cage. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, and in her eyes he saw redemption's fragile dawn, a healer's mercy mirroring his ethical solitude, resisted yet inexorable. "This war ends here," he murmured, the words a vow against the din. "Not in vengeance, but alliance. You, Ilara, your voice unbound the chains below. Will you crown this peace with me?" Her breath hitched, rationalization crumbling under the weight of inevitability. Love was no fairy whisper, but a tragic forge, redemptive and damning, coexisting with the suffering that had hollowed them both. She had been broken, fever-ravaged, abandoned in Eldoria's retreat, hands trembling from wounds she could not heal, yet his presence mended fractures she dared not name. Death hovered, its breath a frost on the tapestry's threads, tempting her mortality's end amid the battle's crescendo. But choice surged, a revelation in the chaos. Step into eternity's shadow, not as prisoner, but consort, transforming war's curse into transcendent light. Yes, she whispered, voice steady as a healer's oath, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that tasted of iron and wild honey, sealing the ritual. Velvet met resolve, jasmine and salt mingling, a bridge between fragile life and endless night. The skirmish waned as dawn fully breached the windows, gilding the bloodied stones in reluctant gold, the last conspirator yielding with a clatter of steel. Lyrian sheathed her blade, amber eyes softening at the sight of their entwined hands, her own desires yielding to the greater weave, a Dhampir's quiet acceptance, thorns of envy blooming into loyalty's rose. Guards hauled the survivors to the dungeons, their chains rattling like echoes of Alara's former bonds, while envoys from the hall rushed in, faces ashen with the night's revelations. Thorn straightened, drawing her to his side, the rose-thorn ring now slipping onto her finger beside her own simple band, a symbol shared, pain and beauty entwined. Word spread through Castle Voreth like wildfire through dry thorns. The traitor's plot thwarted, Eldoria's radicals exposed.